My name is Irene. I am 38 years old. I never expected my marriage to end with my personal belongings thrown across a dry front lawn, but my husband had other plans. He secretly sold our house to fund a new life with a younger woman, leaving me completely destitute with our 5-year-old speech-delayed son. I stood there gripping my terrified boy's hand, watching the man I once trusted stand casually next to a running car. His mistress sat in the passenger seat, flashing a mocking smirk. He did not show a single ounce of regret. Instead, he tossed a rusty set of keys into the dirt at my feet and pointed toward the decaying wooden shack at the far edge of the property. "Life with you is hell," he sneered, refusing to even look at his own child. "That rundown shack is your share. You are on your own." The car engine roared and he drove off into the dust. He left us stranded without a single dollar, assuming I would break under the weight of abandonment. He thought he had completely destroyed us. He was wrong. 11 years later, when his perfect reality violently fell apart and he lost everything, he came crawling back to that very same property to beg for shelter. He expected mercy. But the very first thing I did was turn his existence into a living hell, exactly like the one he once forced upon me. A few days before that terrible morning, a thick stack of files on the dining table sealed the fate of my son and me. My husband Gordon slammed a heavy manila folder down on the kitchen counter late one Tuesday evening. He aggressively pulled out dozens of pages covered in dense legal text and threw a black pen down next to them. He paced around the dining room, acting frantic and highly impatient. He claimed he had successfully negotiated a massive interest rate reduction on our current mortgage, but we needed to execute a formal refinance immediately. He pointed forcefully at the wall clock, raising his voice, insisting the bank representative needed the finalized paperwork faxed over before the business day officially ended. At that exact moment, my 5-year-old son Miles suffered a severe sensory meltdown. Dealing with intense speech delays made daily communication incredibly frustrating for him, and the loud, aggressive tension in the room pushed him completely over the edge. He screamed and thrashed wildly in my arms. I bounced him on my hip, desperately trying to calm his escalating crying. Gordon did not offer to hold his own child. He simply tapped the printed signature lines rapidly with his index finger, demanding I hurry up and sign. Exhausted, overwhelmed, and entirely distracted, I grabbed the pen. I flipped through the massive stack of paperwork, rapidly signing my name wherever Gordon pointed. I did not stop to read the complex legal fine print. I trusted the man I married. I had absolutely no idea that perfectly buried in the middle of those standard banking forms was a quitclaim deed. With a few quick strokes of a pen, I legally forfeited every single right to my own home. I handed the documents back silently, sealing our complete financial execution. The devastating truth crashed down on me just a few days later. Shortly after Gordon sped away from the property with his mistress Bridget, a completely unfamiliar vehicle pulled into the driveway. A confused middle-aged couple stepped out of the car, followed closely by an armed county official. The uniformed officer walked straight up to the front porch and handed me a formal sheriff's notice to vacate. I stared blindly at the legal paperwork in my shaking hands. The officer explained the brutal reality in cold, undeniable facts. The house no longer belonged to me. A formal real estate closing had occurred perfectly 48 hours ago. Gordon orchestrated a flawless, hostile legal scam. He utilized the fake refinance story to trick me into surrendering the property deed, quietly finalized the sale to these unsuspecting strangers, liquidated our entire shared equity, and vanished with Bridget. He absorbed hundreds of thousands of dollars in untraceable cash and left me holding a mandatory eviction notice. The new buyers stood on the concrete driveway, clutching their own legally binding deed of sale. They were not ruthless corporate investors. They were just an ordinary family who bought a house on the open market. They watched the blood completely drain from my face. They looked down at Miles, who was clinging tightly to my leg and crying quietly. The wife stepped forward, her expression shifting from defensive confusion to absolute horror. She lowered her voice, visibly shaken by the brutal scene. "We really did not know you were scammed," she stated quietly. "He told the real estate agents you were already relocating out of state. We had absolutely no idea he left you behind. Legally, they possess the supreme authority to order the sheriff to forcibly remove me from the premises right then and there." Instead, they offered a crucial sliver of human mercy. The husband pointed toward the decaying wooden shack sitting neglected at the far back edge of the yard. He explicitly explained they had zero immediate plans to clear that specific section of the property. They told me I could temporarily move into the shed to avoid sleeping on the dangerous city streets. I had $0 in my bank account. I had no support network in Arizona to call for an emergency rescue. I possessed absolutely no leverage to fight back. I swallowed my shattered pride entirely. I packed our few remaining clothes into black plastic garbage bags, took Miles by the hand, and walked away from the main house. I dragged our bags across the dead grass, pushed open the rotting wooden door of the shed, and stepped into the dark. The first winter inside that decaying shed marked the brutal beginning of an 11-year journey paved with sweat and tears in the Arizona Valley. Survival demanded absolute ruthlessness. The desert temperatures plummeted violently at night. I aggressively stuffed old newspapers into the cracked wooden walls to block the freezing wind. I wrapped Miles in multiple layers of cheap blankets using my own body heat to keep him alive. I refused to let my child freeze. I immediately secured 3 separate manual labor jobs to fund our survival. I scrubbed greasy diner floors before sunrise, inhaling the foul stench of stale bleach. I cleaned empty commercial office buildings during the afternoon, hauling heavy trash bags down endless flights of stairs. I washed dishes in a cramped restaurant kitchen until midnight, submerging my bruised hands in scalding water. My knuckles bled constantly. My muscles burned and my spine fiercely ached. I hoarded every single dollar I earned. I did not spend a single penny on my own comfort. I funneled my entire limited income directly into expensive specialized speech therapy sessions for my son. The intense labor eventually yielded a massive, undeniable victory. When Miles turned 6 years old, he finally broke his heavy silence. He looked directly into my eyes and spoke his very first clear word. However, his severe speech delay did not magically vanish overnight like a fictional movie. Reality proved far more complicated and demanding. He communicated with extreme caution. He spoke with a slow, highly deliberate pacing, pausing heavily between sentences. He analyzed every single syllable before allowing it to escape his mouth. I embraced his unique rhythm completely. We practiced his vocal exercises aggressively every single night under the dim light of the shed. We celebrated every broken sentence and every completed thought as a monumental triumph. While we fought violently for our survival, the man who caused our misery completely erased himself. Gordon vanished from the face of the earth. The mailbox remained completely empty year after year. He never mailed a single Christmas card. He never sent a generic birthday email. He never placed a single phone call to hear his own son speak. I aggressively checked my bank statements every single month looking for any sign of legally mandated child support. The balance always showed an absolute zero. Gordon never deposited a single dime to feed the child he created. He completely abandoned his legal and moral obligations. We officially ceased to exist in his reality. I weaponized his total absence. I used his extreme neglect as pure fuel to push myself infinitely harder. I categorically refused to scrub dirty floors for the rest of my life. I needed real financial power to protect my son. I aggressively utilized the meager remaining hours of my nights to rebuild my entire career. I enrolled in an intensive online accounting certification program. I sat on a broken plastic chair inside the freezing shed, studying complex financial regulations under a single flickering light bulb while Miles slept. I drank cheap instant coffee to violently force my exhausted eyes open. I aggressively memorized tax codes, corporate ledgers, and intricate payroll systems. I passed my rigorous certification exams with absolutely perfect scores. I immediately attacked the local job market. I applied to dozens of prestigious financial institutions across the valley. A local accounting firm finally reviewed my flawless test scores and offered me a junior bookkeeping position. I immediately quit my manual labor jobs and threw my entire existence into the corporate grind. I arrived at the office hours before the senior partners. I volunteered for the most complicated financial audits. I worked aggressively to eliminate severe calculation errors and streamline their entire billing processes. My relentless work ethic forced the executive board to recognize my undeniable value. Over the next few years, I rapidly climbed the corporate ladder. Management aggressively promoted me from a junior bookkeeper to a senior financial analyst. I handled massive corporate accounts and executed critical tax strategies. Eventually, I secured the highly coveted title of accounting manager. My income multiplied exponentially. I commanded a heavy salary, comprehensive health benefits, and total financial independence. I completely controlled my own destiny. The days of counting loose change to buy stale bread permanently ended. I systematically transformed myself from a discarded homeless victim into a heavily armed corporate executive. We remained inside the wooden shed temporarily to hoard our cash, but we absolutely no longer lived in poverty. I quietly stacked a massive financial arsenal. 11 silent years passed, and my relentless corporate grind finally secured the exact down payment required to drastically alter our reality. The family who originally purchased our stolen property decided to relocate out of state. They officially listed the property on the open real estate market. I did not hesitate for a single second. I aggressively mobilized my accumulated financial assets. I contacted their listing agent and submitted a dominant offer. The bank instantly approved my mortgage application based on my flawless credit score and my executive corporate salary. I walked into the downtown closing attorney's office, sat across the polished mahogany table, and confidently signed the purchasing documents. I did not blindly rush. I read every single line. I handed over a massive cashier's check representing hundreds of thousands of dollars and legally purchased the exact piece of land where I was once treated like absolute garbage. I held the official property deed in my hands, permanently securing our absolute ownership. I refused to move my son into the original main house. I ordered a professional demolition crew to bring in heavy excavators and completely level the old structure to the ground. I watched the walls of that cursed house collapse into a pile of shattered wood and twisted metal. I wanted a brand new fortress. I personally navigated the strict local zoning laws and formally secured a comprehensive building permit from the county office. I hired a premium contracting firm to construct a massive reinforced concrete house. I commanded the construction crews to pour the new foundation right next to the original wooden shed. The site manager repeatedly asked if they should demolish the rotting structure to expand the concrete driveway. I firmly rejected his requests. Instead, I paid the crew extra money to structurally reinforce the shed. We replaced the rotted roof planks, installed heavy metal racks, and wired it for basic electricity. I permanently converted our former miserable prison into a functional tool workshop. I kept it standing in the backyard as a brutal daily visual reminder of exactly what we survived and conquered. As the heavy steel beams of our new home rose into the sky, my son reached his 16th birthday. Miles completely defied every single negative medical prediction the doctors ever documented. His severe speech delay never entirely disappeared. He still communicated with a highly deliberate, measured pace. He weighed every single syllable carefully before allowing it to escape his mouth. However, while his verbal words moved slowly, his brain operated at a terrifyingly advanced level. He possessed a documented genius-level intellect. He rapidly bypassed the standard high school curriculum, consuming advanced college-level mathematics and complex theoretical sciences. He spent countless hours locked inside his new bedroom, relentlessly writing complex academic papers and solving theoretical equations that consistently baffled his senior instructors. During the fall semester, a thick, heavy envelope arrived from the federal government. Miles officially secured the highly prestigious National Merit Scholarship. He scored in the top 1% of the entire nation, outperforming hundreds of thousands of students. But his aggressive academic ascent did not stop there. A few weeks later, an official representative from a top-tier university contacted us directly via a certified priority letter and a formal phone call. They aggressively recruited him. The university board officially selected Miles for the elite NIH STEM youth program. The administration bypassed standard admission protocols and awarded him a massive, fully funded research grant. The federal government paid my 16-year-old son to conduct advanced scientific research inside their laboratories, completely covering his tuition, his specialized scientific equipment, and his future housing. We carried his official award letters into our brand-new, aggressively heated living room. We stood together inside the massive house I built from absolute scratch. I walked across the polished hardwood floors and looked at the framed government certificates hanging prominently on our freshly painted walls. I looked out the reinforced glass windows at the old wooden workshop sitting quietly in the backyard. The extreme contrast between our past and our present hit me with undeniable force. We no longer shivered in the cold. We no longer begged for basic human decency. Our lives were completely impenetrable. We commanded deep respect, total financial security, and undeniable pride. We completely conquered the Arizona Valley, and nobody could ever take our power away again. Late one October afternoon, a limping shadow dragged itself toward our front gate, shattering our peace. I stood on the front porch and watched the pathetic figure approach the concrete driveway. It was Gordon. He did not drive a pristine car. He did not wear a sharp suit. He dragged his right leg heavily, leaning his entire body weight onto a cheap wooden cane. His face looked severely aged, hollowed out by extreme stress and undeniable defeat. His clothes hung loosely off his fragile frame, heavily stained and completely unwashed. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, panting heavily. He looked up at the massive concrete fortress I built, and then looked directly at me. His eyes darted around desperately, searching for sympathy. He found none. I crossed my arms and stared down at him, my expression completely frozen. I forced him to break the heavy silence. "Irene, please." He choked out, his voice cracking violently. "I have absolutely nowhere else to go. I am begging you." He aggressively leaned on his cane and unleashed a pathetic flood of excuses. He detailed a catastrophic industrial accident that permanently crushed his right leg, stripping away his physical mobility and his lucrative employment. He expected a massive insurance settlement, but Bridget completely outsmarted him. The exact moment the medical bills aggressively piled up and his paycheck violently stopped, she executed her brutal exit strategy. Bridget secretly drained his bank accounts, packed her bags, and abandoned him inside a cheap rehabilitation clinic. She legally stole every single dollar. He rapidly defaulted on his rent, lost his vehicle, and officially became a homeless vagrant. He stood in my driveway, weaponizing his physical disability to beg for mercy. He cried actual tears, begging for a tiny corner to sleep in, swearing to God he would never disturb our lives. I listened to his miserable speech without moving a single muscle. I analyzed his broken posture and his desperate eyes. I did not feel a single drop of pity. I felt absolute, undeniable power. I slowly walked down the porch steps, closing the physical distance between us. I looked this broken man directly in the eyes. I mirrored the exact same cold, calculated energy he used against me. "You want a place to stay?" I asked, my voice slicing through the cold autumn air like a physical blade. Gordon nodded aggressively, fresh tears spilling down his hollow cheeks. He reached his trembling hand out, attempting to grasp my arm. I instantly stepped back, rejecting his touch completely. "Fine," I stated firmly, offering zero emotion. "But you will live exactly where you forced my son and me to live 11 years ago." I raised my hand and pointed directly past the massive concrete walls of my new house. I pointed straight toward the far edge of the property at the old, heavily weathered wooden workshop sitting in the cold shadows. Gordon turned his head and stared at the miserable wooden structure. His eyes widened in absolute horror as the crushing reality of my condition hit his brain. He recognized the brutal, poetic justice instantly. He swallowed hard, his hands shaking violently against his cane. He opened his mouth to negotiate, but I instantly cut him off. However, I interrupted, raising a single finger to silence him completely. "I do not trust a single word escaping your mouth. You do not get to walk onto my property and make demands. You do not get to step foot inside that workshop right now." I pointed sharply at the hard, cold concrete steps leading up to my front door. "You will sit right there on the concrete," I commanded. "You will sit outside in the cold while I think about whether you actually deserve to breathe the air on my land. Do not knock on my door. Sit down and wait. Gordon looked at the hard concrete entirely stripped of his human dignity. He possessed zero leverage, no money, and absolutely no legal rights. He slowly lowered his broken body onto the freezing steps, gripping his cane in total defeat. I turned my back, walked inside my warm, heavily fortified house, and firmly locked the heavy front door right behind me. I left him completely exposed to the elements, establishing my absolute control over his pathetic existence. The humility of a once cruel man rarely stems from a genuine conscience, and I quickly discovered the exact reason Gordon dragged his broken body back to my property. Gordon did not randomly choose my address for a miraculous family reunion. A few days before his arrival, he connected to a free public Wi-Fi network at a local homeless shelter. He aggressively searched my name and my son's name on the internet, desperately hunting for any digital footprint of our current existence. The search engine immediately populated with official academic press releases. He stumbled upon the official website of the Federal Research Institute. Right there on the main homepage, a massive article prominently featured Miles. The bold headline celebrated my 16-year-old son as a rising scientific prodigy. More importantly, the article explicitly detailed the massive government research grant awarded to him. Gordon saw the astronomical financial figures attached to that federal funding. His extreme poverty instantly collided with pure, unfiltered greed. He aggressively clicked the links, reading every single detail about the money. He realized his discarded son now possessed a fortune, and he wanted a direct cut of that cash. The absolute proof of his disgusting scheme arrived later that exact same night. I could not sleep. I walked quietly downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of water. The house was completely silent. As I stood near the front window, I heard a low, muffled voice echoing from the cold concrete porch outside. Gordon was awake. He huddled in the dark, pressing a cracked, stolen cell phone tightly against his ear. I stood perfectly still, pressing my ear against the reinforced glass. He was leaving a desperate voicemail for a local legal aid office. He did not sound like a grieving father. He sounded like a desperate criminal calculating a bank robbery. I listened as he explicitly asked about the specific legal procedures required to forcibly reinstate his paternal rights. He told the automated machine he needed immediate legal representation to seize financial control over a minor child. He specifically asked if the state of Arizona allowed an estranged biological father to establish a legal conservatorship over a minor's federal research funding. He continuously repeated his status as the biological father, stressing that no formal custody termination ever occurred because he simply moved away. He assumed the legal system would automatically grant him access to the government funds just because he shared half of his DNA with my son. He planned to legally declare himself the primary financial guardian of a minor under 18. He wanted to drain the federal grant money to fund his own pathetic survival. I did not confront him. I did not scream through the glass or unlock the door to physically attack him. I simply turned around and walked back upstairs, my mind operating with cold, lethal precision. I refused to let his desperate legal scam escalate any further. I needed to crush his scheme before it even officially started. As soon as the sun rose, I executed my counterattack. I left Gordon sitting outside on the concrete porch and drove directly to the bank. I requested certified hard copy transcripts of every single bank statement from the past 11 years. I systematically highlighted the complete absence of any child support deposits. I gathered my son's medical records, school enrollment forms, and therapy invoices. I drove to the local courthouse archives to secure additional certified records. I printed out the original sheriff's notice of eviction. I requested certified tax returns spanning over a decade, proving I claimed Miles as a sole dependent while Gordon completely vanished from the federal tax system. Every single document proved that Gordon never contributed a single dollar or a single minute of his time. I immediately dialed the number for my lawyer, Audrey. I secured an emergency meeting at her downtown office for the very next morning. I organized the massive stack of financial documents into a heavy legal binder. I prepared a flawless, undeniable paper trail of extreme child abandonment. I did not just hire Audrey to defend us. I hired her to permanently sever Gordon's legal existence in our lives. Gordon foolishly thought he could waltz into a courtroom, cry a few fake tears about his ruined leg, and easily manipulate a judge into handing him my son's federal money. He severely underestimated the financial and legal fortress I spent 11 years building. I was no longer a terrified, broke mother crying inside a freezing wooden shed. I was a heavily armed corporate manager preparing to completely execute his absolute legal destruction. I packed the heavy binder into my briefcase. He had absolutely no idea he was walking directly into a legal slaughterhouse. The official confrontation did not unfold with explosive screaming matches inside a living room, but through cold, undeniable legal stipulations inside Audrey's downtown law office. Gordon arrived at the heavily guarded corporate building later that morning. He limped into the pristine glass conference room, leaning heavily on his cheap wooden cane. He immediately attempted to weaponize his pathetic appearance, slouching deep into the expensive leather chair across the polished mahogany table. Audrey sat directly beside me, meticulously organizing a massive stack of official documents. Miles sat quietly on my other side, staring blankly at the broken man who biologically created him. Gordon initiated the meeting by launching into a heavily rehearsed, sickeningly manipulative speech. He completely ignored Audrey and spoke directly toward Miles. He aggressively played the role of a desperate reformed parent seeking total forgiveness. He demanded an immediate opportunity to mend their severely fractured relationship. He blatantly lied, claiming he suffered severe depression, devastating injuries, and massive financial setbacks that permanently prevented him from reaching out earlier. Then he finally revealed his true, disgusting agenda. He casually suggested that since Miles was still a minor, he possessed the strict legal obligation as the biological father to step in and formally manage his son's newly acquired federal research funds. He demanded full conservatorship over the massive government grant, claiming he wanted to protect the money. Miles did not flinch. He did not show a single ounce of fear, anger, or sympathy. My 16-year-old son slowly leaned forward, resting his hands firmly on the cold glass table. He looked directly into Gordon's greedy, desperate eyes. When Miles finally spoke, he utilized his highly deliberate, measured pacing to deliver an absolutely crushing verbal blow. "My father left me when I was exactly 5 years old," Miles stated coldly, perfectly articulating every single syllable without a trace of hesitation. "The person who actually raised me, protected me, and fed me was never you. You are a complete stranger. You do not get to walk back in here today and pretend to be my family. You get absolutely nothing from me." Gordon immediately opened his mouth to argue, but Audrey instantly shut him down. She aggressively slammed the heavy legal binder onto the center of the table. The loud crack echoed violently off the glass walls, forcing Gordon to flinch backward. Audrey did not offer a negotiation. She executed a flawless, brutal legal slaughter. "You possess absolutely no legal standing in this room," Audrey declared aggressively, pointing a sharp pen directly at his chest. "We formally filed a petition for the absolute termination of your parental rights. We are executing this legal action under 4 specific undeniable statutes." She flipped the heavy binder open and rapidly fired the legal charges across the table like lethal bullets. First, failure to support. You have not contributed a single penny to this minor's survival in over a decade. Second, abandonment. You willingly fled the property, liquidated shared assets, and deliberately hid your physical location to avoid basic financial responsibilities. Third, 11 years of no contact. You utterly failed to place a single phone call, send a single email, or mail a single letter. And finally, failure to exercise parenting time. You completely forfeited every single custody right the exact second you drove away from that house. Audrey aggressively pushed a thick stack of finalized termination papers across the table. She completely dismantled his entire delusional scheme in less than 60 seconds. Under the laws of this state, your absolute documented neglect automatically strips you of all parental and civil rights regarding this minor, Audrey explained ruthlessly. You have 0 legal authority over his medical decisions, 0 access to his federal grant money, and 0 right to claim formal guardianship. You are officially erased from his legal existence. Gordon stared blindly at the termination documents in total shock. His hands shook violently. He tried to stutter out a pathetic defense, claiming he would fight the petition in front of a family court judge to secure his paternal rights. Audrey smiled coldly and delivered the final lethal strike. If you attempt to contest this termination in court, I will immediately file a massive countersuit for 11 solid years of retroactive child support. I will calculate the maximum penalty interest allowed by law, and I will personally ensure the state aggressively prosecutes you for felony criminal non-support. You will instantly trade your current homelessness for a concrete state prison cell. The brutal threat instantly crushed him. Gordon completely collapsed backward into his leather chair. The fake confidence violently drained from his hollow face, leaving behind pure terror. He picked up the heavy black pen with a trembling hand and signed the voluntary termination waivers. He legally surrendered every single right to the son he abandoned, destroying his pathetic extortion plan entirely. When no legal protection remained and no safe shelter existed anywhere else, the traitor was forced to crawl back and beg for mercy from the exact person he once brutally trampled. Gordon limped heavily up my concrete driveway later that same evening. The absolute legal destruction at Audrey's office permanently stripped away his last remaining shred of arrogant confidence. He carried absolutely nothing except a single filthy plastic bag containing his few remaining clothes. He collapsed onto the cold concrete steps, completely defeated and physically exhausted. He possessed zero money for a cheap motel room and completely lacked any friends to call for an emergency rescue. He stared up at me with dead, hollow eyes, desperately pleading for a tiny corner of the property to sleep on. He cried violently, swearing he would sleep in the actual dirt if he had to. He surrendered his entire pride. I stared down at the broken man begging at my feet. I did not scream at him. I did not hurl emotional insults. I simply turned around, walked back inside the warm house, and retrieved a specific legal document I prepared earlier that week. I returned to the porch and dropped a single printed sheet of paper onto his lap, along with a black pen. I pointed sharply to the bold letters printed at the top of the page. It was a formal occupancy agreement. I refused to let him establish any legal residency or claim squatters' rights on my land. I explicitly explained the strict, undeniable terms of the contract. The legal document clearly stated he possessed absolutely no tenant rights. I retained the absolute legal authority to evict him immediately at any given second, without providing any prior eviction notice. Furthermore, I completely insulated myself against any federal forced labor or exploitation accusations. The legal document explicitly dictated a strictly voluntary exchange. Gordon willingly agreed to perform heavy manual labor to compensate for his daily meals and his temporary physical shelter. He explicitly volunteered to mow the massive lawn, aggressively scrub the concrete driveway, pull desert weeds by hand, and haul heavy trash bags under the scorching Arizona sun. He legally traded his physical labor for basic human survival. Gordon read the strict, unforgiving conditions. His dirty hands shook violently, but he possessed zero alternatives. He clicked the pen and signed his own name, legally binding his entire existence to my absolute control. I picked up the signed contract. I pulled a rusty metal key from my pocket and tossed it onto the concrete directly at his feet. I pointed straight toward the old, decaying wooden workshop sitting in the dark backyard. I commanded him to get off my front porch immediately and move into his new quarters. He slowly pushed his broken body off the ground, leaned heavily on his wooden cane, and dragged his crippled leg across the dead grass. He pushed open the rotting door of the shed and disappeared into the suffocating darkness. Winter eventually swept across the Arizona Valley, bringing freezing, brutal winds. Gordon huddled in the dark corner of that freezing wooden workshop. He wrapped himself in a cheap, thin blanket, violently shivering on a hard canvas cot. He stared through the cracked, dirty window pane. Directly across the yard, my massive concrete house radiated intense warmth and bright light. Through the reinforced glass, he watched Miles and me sitting comfortably by a massive stone fireplace, eating a hot, expensive meal and laughing together. Gordon watched the exact family he brutally destroyed, living an impenetrable, luxurious life. He realized the horrifying truth. He was permanently trapped outside in the freezing cold, performing grueling physical labor just to eat our leftovers. I did not kill him. I simply forced him to live inside the exact same hell he created for us 11 years ago. Actions always carry massive consequences, and absolute betrayal guarantees a devastating karmic debt. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end on Revenge Mode. Do you think Gordon received the exact punishment he deserved? Or was this strict occupancy agreement too merciful for a traitor? Share your unfiltered thoughts in the comments section below. Hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of undeniable justice.